Welcome to Make It Make Sense. We are Marlene and Paulina, two research assistants at the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies at JGU Mainz.
In this podcast, we take you on a deep dive into the world of our study program. Together with guests from all throughout the discipline, we talk about everyday societal topics you might not have guessed are connected to our field.
Join us in making sense of the issues that surround us and, most importantly, have fun listening. Hey guys, and welcome back to Make It Make Sense.
Hi, welcome to our second episode of Season 2. And as you can tell from our title, today's episode is all about aging, more specifically aging studies.
Yeah, and maybe at some point you've asked yourself, why do we fear aging so much? What if we could kind of rethink it? And representations of aging are really all around us. Anti-aging commercial ads, aging filter on TikTok, shows like Grace and Frankie or The Golden Girls. And actually just yesterday I saw like a TikTok. I don't even remember what it was about, but it was like yada yada yada, so aging might not even be that bad. And I was like, God, good that we're recording this episode.
Very on theme.
Yeah.
And you guys might not know this, but aging studies is a field that actually pops up in different corners here in the American Studies Department in Mainz. Julia Feltner, for example, you might remember her from our previous season, wrote her doctoral thesis in aging studies. I think she even mentioned this, right? And we talked about her switch from aging studies into what she's doing now. So
I mean, she's still kind of involved in the field, but also we have a lot of classes, for example, that kind of deal with aging in different ways. So we have classes on children's literature, and just as you're listening to this last semester, we had a class on age gap romance, which features age in a different way. And also there's the Collective Research Center on Humane Differentiation, and we're going to get into that in a second.
Right, but first, let's introduce our first guest of Season 2, who we're so excited to have on the show today, Dr. Ruth Gehrmann.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Ruth has done extensive work in aging studies, so she is really the perfect guest for this topic today. And as you listeners might remember from Season 1, we always let our guests introduce themselves. So here we go. Ruth, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your connection to aging studies, and your work in the CRC?
Yes, I can certainly try to do that. So I'm a lecturer here at the Obama Institute, and I'm very much interested in the role of pop culture and how that impacts our lived experience. And currently I'm looking at how older age is presented and sort of navigated in pop cultural texts. And I'm generally interested in how that sort of universal experience of aging, right? We're all aging. So I'll be older when this interview is older. I'll be older. And let's face it, like, so will you, right? Yeah. You will also be older when this episode is over, right?
That's a lie, guys.
Don't want to, like, truth bomb, right? But it's something that's going to happen. So we are all universally growing older. But at the same time, it's so individual. So it's very much shaped by how we identify with regard to gender, with regard to race, class. What kind of job do we have to work in for our lives? Like, that will impact the way that we grow older and the way that our bodies look, of course, and how we will be sort of seen in society. And that's something that I find very interesting. And I also think that aging, like, once you start actually paying attention to it, it's everywhere, right? Because like, if you're looking at coming of age, that is an aging experience. Mm-hmm. And if you're, thinking about becoming a parent, that is something that's closely tied to, like rites of passages of growing older. And you've already mentioned the Center on Human Differentiation. And I think that's something that we look at there as well, this idea of the processes by which we make people different or the same. And I think that aging is very much sort of in flux constantly. I mean, just imagine coming home, right? You come home and all of a sudden you're 16 again, right? Like, you bicker with your siblings and all of that. So aging is not just one thing, but it's very much impacted by our surroundings as well.
I already love it.
That sounds so interesting. Maybe real quick before we move on, because I I think some of our listeners might not know this. Can we quickly talk about the Collective Research Center and what that is and what it does, maybe just broadly?
Yeah, so it's like the Collaborative Research Center. It consists of all of these very, very different projects that focus on the way that we make sense of how human beings differentiate between each other, but also are made different and so forth. So, for instance, we do have like a project that focuses on sexual identities and how people will claim different identities, but also are sort of assigned them. We are focusing on age, obviously, and how that is impacted, and how that there's also like normative expectations about aging, sort of like aging successfully, for instance, what that might entail. There are sociological studies, linguistic studies, for instance, on differentiation in African languages and so forth. So it's a huge project. History is in there, sociology is in there, American studies very prominently in there.
Because
and
we're everywhere, guys.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think especially aging studies as the topic of this episode is the perfect thing for us to talk about on this podcast. Because, I mean, as you already said, the aging is one of those topics where you can really see how culture constructs identities, right? Like in terms of youth, beauty, productivity, independence. And getting back to the American studies of it all, which you just mentioned too, that's exactly the kind of thing American studies helps us make sense of, right? So aging studies really is deeply embedded in the overall field of American studies, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think sort of how can we approach American studies? I think one way to understand it is actually how to make sense.
Thank you.
Just I did like I sort of waited for you to react to that one, but how
Thank
to
you,
make
thank you.
sense of of the narratives, right, that surround us. And I think the significance of narratives cannot be overestimated. I mean, politically currently, right, like narrative is everything basically. And I think being aware of the fact that we are shaped by the narratives that surround us is sort of one of the key elements of what we try to do here, to actually give students and also everyone who engages in the field the chance to detect, okay, so this is a narrative and someone is telling something and I am being told something, and that might shape the way that I understand my surroundings, and I also understand myself. And that is sort of something that is key to aging studies as well. Sort of seeing that when you look at representation of older people, you're also being told a specific narrative of what it means to grow older. And this is not there's this general idea of sort of like, but that's just normal, right? It's just normal that when you grow older, your opinion doesn't matter as much as when you're younger, right?
Or you're breaking down one way or another.
Absolutely. And that's just something that sort of when you realize that there's also a cultural narrative that shapes that, you can understand that and you can engage with it in a different way. So that is how I would understand the task of American studies and also of aging studies.
Nice. That's so cool.
And I mean, your listeners must be kind of like sick and tired of hearing it at this point. Welcome back for a second season of all this. But this field is so broad, and American studies is a way of unpacking so many things. So I'd say let's go right to the unpacking part, y'all. What do you think?
Right, exactly. Because we brought a little example from pop culture for us to kind of unpack and take a closer look at today. Because, I mean, as we've touched on, there's lots of tropes surrounding aging, the decline narrative, for example, or, I mean, age can be looked at in so many different ways, empowerment and so forth. So there's so many narratives that deal with aging in different ways or depict it. But for our episode today, we chose to talk about, drum roll, the Twilight series, which is something you might not have guessed, but bear with us because it fits.
Yeah, and it's a really popular example, so most of you will probably have seen or read it or heard of it in some way, shape, or form, at least in like TikTok memes. But maybe you didn't know that it is so rich as a study subject for aging studies, because if you look closely, it is pretty evident. So on the one hand, we have Bella as the female protagonist, who is a literal teenager spiraling out of control about getting 1 year older. So we really have that being afraid to age narrative. And then Edward, who's like 100 years old, but
over
stuck at
100 years.
17 forever. Yeah, he's over 100 years, right?
Yeah.
I forgot.
I forgot. It might be like 107, but
Yeah.
he's old.
Very old.
Really old. So, if you will, it's like the ultimate anti-aging fantasy. Like it's this, especially in Edward, this idea of eternal youth, eternal smooth skin,
Glittering skin.
Skin of a killer, Bella.
This is the skin of an 107-year-old dude. I don't know. And it's, for Bella too, it's this internal 17-year-old boyfriend who is like a century old, but doesn't look it. So this is very rich as a study material. And there's lots of fascinating angles to look at this from.
Yeah, and I think it also tells us something just about how culture treats aging, and especially in women, I think, as something to fear or fix, maybe.
Because Bella is so afraid of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess you could say Twilight is a very exaggerated version of something we actually see everywhere in real life or in a lot of places. And the anxieties people have about getting older are real. Like people are experiencing that. And for example, people turning 30, it's like, oh no, you hit this mark of 30 and suddenly you're supposed to, I don't know, have your life together and everything. So
There's a whole Friends episode just about that.
Exactly, right? So it is kind of like this common trope that we encounter in pop culture again and again.
Exactly.
Right. So, Ruth, this brings
our
us
actual expert on this.
Exactly. Because when we watch something like Twilight, just as we said, we see so many conflicting ideas about aging, right? It's like fear, fascination, because Edward is so old, he doesn't look it, but they're still. And this idea, we haven't mentioned this, of stopping time altogether, because ultimately, Bella becoming a vampire, spoiler for those who haven't seen it, but that's at least part of the idea, right? Mm-hmm. Why she does it is like she doesn't want to get older without Edward there, or with him, and she gets older and he doesn't. I don't know. So to maybe start off this conversation with one really big question for beginners, and this includes us maybe, because and our listeners, what is aging studies and how does it help us make sense? Title drop. Again, not scripted, you guys, of cultural moments like Twilight.
So sort of how can we use aging studies and what does it generally do? So aging studies in general starts from the assumption that aging is not just a biological process, but it's also one that is deeply rooted in culture. And I think one example that might help us to make that distinction is we may get gray hair, for instance, right? So our hair may turn gray, but the fact that we dye our hair would be cultural. So the turning gray would be biological, but the dyeing would be culturally produced. There's no need to do that. And we could also think about this along the lines of gender and sex. So there's like a biological body, but then the way that the body is formed will impact how it is culturally produced, and that will impact how it is treated, and that will sort of in a sort of like a cyclic way. And that is, I think, also something that we can say with regard to aging and like chronological age, so just the years that you've lived, but also then how that is being processed culturally. And this cultural process is, of course, impacted by, the performance you do of your aging. So like you can wear specific clothing. You can, of course, speak a specific language. And there are so many small markers that will actually reveal how old, right, you are.
Also just the type of makeup, for example, you're wearing, and you're like, oh, that's the makeup you did 10 years ago, you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it is sort of the way that it can almost be described sort of like in this moment of trying to pass for younger, trying to appear younger. But then you might also, in other situations, you might want to appear more. Like if you're in your 20s and you want to be taken more seriously, you might actually want to try and look older, right? Whatever that means specifically. But the idea of having like an appropriate behavior for different age spans would also be part of that. And then you can break with that, and you can sort of play with it, and you can reveal that this is also sort of part of a performance.
Yeah, right. So aging studies comes into play here because we're consuming different types of content. Like, for example, watching Twilight.
Oh, sorry, didn't talk about Twilight. Yeah, sorry.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah, we should, yeah.
And with that example, we're not just watching a vampire romance, but also cultural fears about getting older played out in an extreme form. And because we haven't mentioned it yet, Twilight is a pretty strong example for this whole anti-aging hype. I mean, Bella wants to freeze herself at then 18 forever, and Edward hasn't aged since the Titanic sank. So
crazy if you think about it.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Why is the idea of a certain agelessness or non-aging so seductive in media and then real life too?
Yeah, sorry, didn't pick up on Twilight earlier. Thank you for picking Twilight. I think this is sort of like the text that pops up most often. So like everyone always wants to talk about Twilight, which is, I think, interesting because the text, like the first novel is almost 20 years old, right? So it's in and of itself, there's sort of
there's
like
an aging thing.
Yes, there's an aging experience of the text, right? Different people will approach this text differently and with different sort of goals in mind. But what I think about agelessness in Twilight is that, so generally, why is aging framed as decline? And people have tended to say, well, it's framed as decline because it's sort of like the path that leads to dying and to death. But I don't think that's the case in Twilight because, I mean, Bella constantly wants to die, right? It's like in every film and every novel, she wants to die for someone. I think it is literally the first thing she says in the first Twilight film is like, dying in the place of someone you love sounds like a good way to go. So she's like very much the person who wants to kill herself, to be killed by someone else in order to save this godlike creature, Edward. And then, of course, later on, she's very much willing to die in order to give birth to her daughter, right? So and this is, I think, like, obviously tied to gender dynamics. I mean, I don't think you have to look too closely to see that there's a gender dynamic at play here as well. And the same holds true for aging experience, right? So she looks at Edward and she always describes him as a god. So she repeatedly calls him that, like a statue, like a godlike creature, eternally cold, but that's not creepy. That is desirable, obviously.
Hot in the same.
Obviously desirable. And I think that sort of what Twilight actually promotes is agelessness and ageless perfection in this American family setting in which, and this is something that I struggle with. Just imagine you're like in your 50s or in your 60s, but there's another vampire who will treat you like you are literally their child. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a scene in the first film in which Rosalie, who's always against Bella, and she's against her because she's sort of jealous of her because Bella can still get pregnant. And I mean, that is the reason why women would have a problem because, right, once again. But I mean, so Rosalie drops this bowl and then her vampire mother, like the mother role, Esme comes in, she's like, you clean that up.
Yeah.
And Rosalie does that. And all of these people are sort of chronologically above the age of 50, but they perform the role of a family nevertheless, right?
Yeah.
So they are all basically stuck in the roles, not of how long they have actually lived, but the age they present to the outside world, right? And I mean, like the Edward and his siblings, right?
Yeah.
They actually finish high schools, and it's like it's an inside joke for them to do that again and again. And I mean,
they have like 20 degrees. They have this whole wall of like
That's
these graduation hats, right?
Yes. And that's just...
It sounds like a nightmare. But
Yes,
honestly.
that is the thing. That's the thing. Like, why not? Like, why do it at all? So they're very much adhering to this idea of social order and structure. And I think that is very much sort of at the heart of Twilight is you can live forever, right? And you can, but you have to do it in a very specific social setting that very much confirms with age-assigned roles in which you behave like someone who does that, and who's very sort of sure of themselves and the role they have. And that is sort of how Bella, if sort of returning to Bella, she's always framed as someone who's like internally 35, right? Like her mother says to her, like, oh, you were born being 30, something like that.
An old soul.
She's an old soul, and she needs to be an old soul, right?
Yeah.
In order for that to make sense.
Yeah.
Because and we have to face this, right? Edward, and I think like we all think about the actors maybe, but he is someone who is 100 years older than the person he actually marries. And I think there is a creepy potential in that. Very creepy potential.
Yeah.
But it is, first and foremost, romance, right?
Yeah.
So as readers, we are very much invited to think like, oh, that's a love story. Like he's not being a predator. He's not being a predator towards Bella, but he's also not a vampire who is a predator, right?
Yeah.
So he could easily be framed as a predator, but of course he isn't, because this is romantic.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that this is very romantic. And I think this only works because she's an old soul. And the sort of like the other person sort of who's that being like played against is of course Jessica. Because Jessica, Bella's friend, she's like very giggly and she's like very fun and she's very interested in Edward, right?
Yeah.
But we are made like from the outset, it's like clear, like no, Jessica is not for this like 100-year-old man, right? Because like she's a teenager and Bella isn't a teenager.
This is
right?
insane.
So she needs to be sort of like a not teenager for her to be actually be sort of like suitable for the dreamy, glittering vampire guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense no matter how creepy it is. And I think we get just that sense of like certain age tropes are okay if presented in a different way in like media a lot. Different
Definitely.
novels as well. Yeah.
That leads me to my next question. Because if we sort of want to broaden our scope here a little bit and look beyond Twilight as our main pop culture example, because I mean, we've talked a lot about how aging is framed in Twilight, but do you find similar narratives in other texts or media examples and pop culture examples that you study in your research? Like, are there maybe even complementary things that you've encountered?
I think so. Like, I think if we think about Bella not being afraid of dying, but being afraid of actually growing older and of looking older than her partner, that is, of course, also the idea that growing older, looking older is sort of less worthy than looking young and being young, right? Appearing young, passing as young. And I think this is a narrative we find in very, very different contexts. So, for instance, sort of the Sephora kids, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sephora kids of tendency, it's people who are under the age of 12, so we would sort of understand them as children, and they buy or often steal, because they don't have the financial means, high quality anti-aging products at Sephora and also other places, of course, because they've been made to believe that they need to stop their skins from aging. And this has been closely tied to sort of social media and like the products that are being promoted there. And I think this is really interesting, right? So like you're 12, but you've already been made sure, like you've already been told basically, right, that it's downhill now, right? You're already doing repair work. You're already sort of trying to keep your skin at that age. And I think that resonates with Bella, right?
Yeah.
If we think about Bella being like freaking out of turning 18, like 18 is commonly associated like in Germany, for instance, you would think about like you getting your driver's license.
Yeah.
You can be like you're a full adult now. It's something to look forward to.
You
I
can
think
vote and drink.
Absolutely. It's in many ways it's sort of like associated with sort of having the capacity to live your life to the fullest. And she's already dreading that, so she doesn't want to become an adult in that regard as well, right? She wants to retain that youthfulness. And I think that is a narrative well beyond the tropes of Twilight. Yeah.
I think that's something that just we might encounter in our everyday life too. Is like, I mean, even watching TV and seeing all these advertisements of anti-aging products, collagen or whatever it is that you're supposed to like take to, stop the aging process as early as possible. And it's this whole spiral that we're essentially going down, or it's this, I think, one big narrative that we're being fed through the media, essentially, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there are positive examples, I think so too. So there are narratives that already do a better job, quote unquote, at depicting age in like an anxiety-free, more positive way, I think. What do you think, Ruth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's sort of like this idea of focusing on change and also sort of if like just generally, if we want to have a long life, all of us are hoping to grow older. Right, so this is sort of something that we aspire to be, actually. And I think this is something sort of the ways that we can reframe that narrative. And staying within the vampire genre, right, because you talked about Twilight today, we might think about the film What We Do in the Shadows. There's actually a vampire who meets his long-lost love, and she's 96. And the vampire then turns her into a vampire, right, and she lives with him. And she looks 96 years old. And this idea is that he says, like, why shouldn't I turn her into a vampire? She's the person I love, right?
Yeah.
So he's sort of like, and he's saying, I know, like, people will say this is so strange because you're 400 and she's only 96. So you're so much older than she is. But, like, I don't care about that, right? So there's very much sort of this playing with age normativity and the idea of her not being a possible mate for someone who looks so much younger.
Yeah.
But sort of like in the context of them being vampires, there's a arbitrariness that's sort of revealed about process of aging as well.
And I mean, we have the extremely popular TV series Vampire Diaries as well, where Elena doesn't want to be turned into a vampire and, again, spoiler alert, even manages to reverse the process in later seasons then. So I think there really are a whole lot of different ways to look at all of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're too unaware oftentimes that there's more different, better approaches to aging than just what we always see in the media, right?
Or we're not even aware that there's like an age narrative going on. For example, I mean, Twilight, I think, is a big one that most people will know and have watched the movies or read the books as teenagers. But Vampire Diaries, for example, I mean, I haven't seen it. A little education gap going on for me, I think. But that's one that I mean, just from hearing about it, you know, I just broadly know what's going on there.
Sorry for the spoiler.
But that's okay. But that's one that I would have never thought about, you know, when it comes to, I mean, it's this whole vampire thing, just like in Twilight probably, and that's probably also always tied to aging in some regard, right? It's like monster romance and whatever. I mean, vampires are known for like staying young forever or living for a very long time without aging. So, yeah. So to you listeners, next time you're watching a show and you notice something like that, there we go. That's American Studies in our everyday life. Yeah. And it's something that this made me think of, and this gets back to something you said, I think, a little earlier in this episode, Ruth, is aging being this kind of individual thing. Because I think that applies to Twilight too, right? Because Bella is like her struggle and her fear of getting older. She's facing that alone. I mean, of course, it's Edward and his family being vampires. That's not something everyone knows. So, of course, she has to like keep that secret and keep it to herself. But that makes it a very private and individual thing for her. But, and again, looking beyond Twilight, what happens when we view aging as a kind of more relational or communal thing? Not in the media, not just in the media maybe, but just, also in real life and in general. Is that possible? Are there narratives that...
But I think it's something that sort of we can try to achieve by, as I mentioned, sort of being aware that there are narratives that inform the way that we understand the world. I think that if we understand ourselves, like all of us are in the same boat, right? All of us are aging. And I think being aware of that and being aware of the fact that you're hoping to be older yourself one day too, I think that will change the way that you engage with older people, for instance. Because like commonly, I think older people are framed as being other in a way, right? As being sort of like older women are like they're cute, they're like a little bird, like these kind of stereotypes. Older men are grumpy, and that's okay. Like all of these kinds of stereotypes, and I don't think they like come from a bad place, but they of course very much de-individualizing people of older age. And I think if we just bear in mind that these people will also have a very specific lived experience, are very specific people, like, just like you, basically, right? I think that will impact.
She looked directly at me. She said,
yes, no, of course. I mean, it's just, it is the case, right? That sometimes you look at older people and you just, right? Like that is the way that they're being wrongfully stereotyped as being just like this unknowable mass in a way. And then just realizing, okay, so each of these people is just like an individual who has very specific traits, who may have, a sexual identity, for instance, who may be queer, who may be impacted by the race they identify with or are identified with, and so forth. And being aware of that, I think that will very much shape the way that we approach aging as a community and as a society. Yeah.
And so to maybe kind of finish this off with another pretty broad question, that's our theme here today, because we talked about in the very beginning, I'm trying to
close the circle.
Close the circle here a little bit. We also talked about the burden discourse and the breaking down of the individual, and then in connection with maybe viewing age in kind of more like a communal thing. How do we then bring the aspect of care into this, and maybe move, or should we move, and if so, how, towards a more care-oriented view on aging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's sort of almost like a political question, right? And that's something that aging studies also does, is being sort of focused on care work, like care work in, for instance, living facilities and so forth, and actually looking at that as well. And I think that if we approach that, again, not as a problem that society faces, so that is sort of this reading of the Great Tsunami, right? Like this very harmful idea of like this wave of older people and like they now have to be taken care of. But as something that we perceive to be, first of all, different levels of care will be required by different individuals, right? So sort of there's that happening as well. And if we approach that as a community, and also maybe find ways that, for instance, care can be administered in sort of unusual ways, in like, shared living facilities for older people, for instance. These kinds of ideas. I think we will find that if we integrate, but this is just, I'm not a specialist in these kinds of structural questions, but if we think about sort of like integrating, for instance, older people into the lives of younger people by shared housing, for instance, I think you will also have a different idea of what it means to grow older, and to focus on this aspect as well.
And I just have to think about something that we actually have at this university, because we also have like a study 50 plus program here. So there's also, if we move a little bit further with that kind of train of thought, is like reintegrating, not in like old age, but later midlife, reintegrating into like this society or that student body that is usually thought of as like younger. Right?
Yeah. Giving them access to further education. And
So I think in the very furthest sense, we can look at that also as like a care aspect.
Yeah.
Right?
That's such a smart connection to make. Yeah.
Sometimes these brain cells work. But so I'm kind of trying to sum all of this up, because we had so many great ideas today, but we have that kind of like political thing with care that we're obviously not the experts on to speak. But also we always, when we think of aging in any way, shape or form, we always have to be aware of the underlying narratives that kind of form our perspectives. And also I had to think about that earlier when we were talking about the living situation of Edward. And we also have to oftentimes keep in mind that we are coming at this from a very westernized perspective, because that is a westernized constructed family arrangement that they live in, especially with these roles and gender roles that they have in that Forever Young family. So, yeah, I think, I don't know which episode it was, but there was one episode last season where we were like, the most important thing is to always contextualize. And I'm just going to bring that back. Contextualize, y'all.
Exactly. I mean, that means maybe if we want to really close the circle, at least try to close the circle and get back to, again, Twilight. So
You're welcome.
If we were to write, say, a fan fiction of Twilight, and no, I'm not talking about 50 Shades of Grey, which is perhaps the most popular Twilight fan fiction there is. And by the way, also great study subject for aging studies.
Didn't you want to write your paper about that?
Yes, I will. But that is another episode of this podcast. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so Twilight rewritten in a way that's like more age positive, or at least, deals with age and the aging process in a different way. I mean, it's really hard to detangle all of it, right? Because the whole vampire romance thing, Edward is really old, so we have this age aspect in there. But I don't know, could you envision, I mean, both of you, a version where Bella treats this whole subject differently? Maybe she's not that afraid to age. Maybe, she has a more Vampire Diaries approach to everything.
I mean, I'm just going to say, I don't really think that would work for Twilight specifically, because the sentiment of just being afraid to age is so deeply ingrained within every aspect. And I mean, we heard about like other... What was that movie? I'm sorry, you mentioned.
Oh, What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is an amazing... I haven't watched it, but from what has told us. That is an amazing example of how to also subvert these ideas a little bit and play with that whole anti-age trope. So I think for Twilight specifically, I'm just going to say it is what it is. It has its audience.
I can see the shitstorm brewing of everyone being like,
too.
Don't take Twilight away.
I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm really hard trying not to bring up like fantasy novels like ACOTAR. I'm not gonna.
Please do, because
I really cannot, because some of these are my favorite novels and I don't want to ruin it for myself.
No, I know.
But yeah, I mean, we see that everywhere, especially in like popular fiction. And I mean, ACOTAR, Fourth Wing, Throne of Glass, these are immensely popular novels right now. With Fourth Wing not as big an age gap, but still like the dynamic is very revealing.
He's also very much the shadow daddy.
Yeah.
Right? So the shadow daddy upholds, even if it's just a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we see it everywhere, and it has its audience, so I don't think it will die too soon. And I personally cannot imagine Twilight ever stepping out of that dynamic. But again, there are other pieces of media, pieces of fiction that kind of subvert all these ideas. So just turn to those.
Right. What do you think, Ruth?
Yes, I think any idea that sort of like Bella and Edward wouldn't end up together, like within the Twilight, yeah, everyone knows like that is how this story works. But I think it's interesting, like, and you've mentioned this with regard to fan fiction, is that people do have this desire for them, like, sort of like to step out of this heteronorm relationship, right? So there's like fan fiction about Bella and Alice, for instance. There's all of these different readings of how this narrative could have played out differently. And I think this is like thinking about how it could have been different is something that already sort of denormalizes what we're encountering. And it's already sort of like a critical act to do that. And something that we sort of like, as scholars of American culture and literature and just pop culture in general, we try to do is sort of being aware of, oh, okay, so this is something that's being told to us. How could we tell this differently? And by doing this, you're already doing basically like, you're already doing, a sort of like a literary critical approach in and of itself, right? So yes, absolutely agree. I don't think that Twilight would have worked if it had gone any other way. Like if just like in, you know, New Moon, second installment, Bella's like, yeah, you're right. Like Jacob is way like, you know, he's more interesting. Like Jacob is like a nice alternative. I'm just going to leave Edward behind and just like move on. I don't think it would have worked, right? Because like the idea of this very clear-cut romance is definitely sort of like return to Edward.
Also this like almost fated mates trope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think it's still sort of absolutely worthwhile to consider sort of alternatives and to just be aware of the narrative that is at place here. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet there's fan fictions out there that are like
Period.
exactly that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There are fan fictions out there, period.
All right. I feel like I'm always the one who says this, but our time is coming to an end. Next episode, can we please switch it up? You have to
We're
be
gonna switch
you
it
have to
up.
be the
I'm
bummer
gonna-
for
yeah.
once. But yeah, I love this whole conversation, and I wish we could do it for more hours. But so maybe as like a final thought,
As a closer.
as a closing thought, academia and American studies as a discipline really, really can help shine light on this entire
Yeah.
discourse surrounding aging studies, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've touched on this in the beginning, right? The age and aging is one of those topics that proves how American studies can be presented and represented in our everyday lives. And it provides, or American studies provides a lens through which we get to see these patterns and narratives and who benefits from certain narratives and who's excluded from them. So,
Right. And now before we actually wrap up this episode, you listeners might remember this from our last season, but we have one last amazing, special, personal question for Ruth.
exactly. And today, I mean, this episode is aging themed. We'd like to know, what's one stereotype about aging you wish we would retire in society?
Like your personal worst.
Yeah.
So I think there are many sort of like ones that I think are difficult. One that I find difficult is sort of men age like wine and women age like milk.
Oh.
And it's just something like I always feel like it's a bit dated. But then I went to a birthday party just recently of a friend of mine, and I think she turned like 42, and she told me that ever since she turned 40, people no longer say like, oh yeah, you're like, happy birthday, you're doing so great. What they say is, you're keeping up well. Like you're still good, like in a way of like, you're still like, you're fit. Right, like in that kind of like way, like you're still good looking. And I asked her like, oh, is your male partner being asked, sort of told the same things? And she said, yeah, no, obviously not. He's never been sort of like complimented on his looks after turning 40. So I think even though this stereotype like appears to be like we have overcome it, I'm afraid we very much haven't. We haven't overcome that yet. Yes.
Yeah, that is, I want to say a good one, but that's horrible. That's a good example.
Yeah, it's a good bad one. Yeah.
It's a good horrible one.
It's a good horrible one, yeah. It's, I want to almost say a classic, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right. On that note, that concludes our episode for today. We hope you gained some new insights on aging and how it's embedded within American studies.
Yeah, and Ruth, thank you so much for being here today. Seriously, it was amazing.
Yeah, thank you for helping us make aging make sense. Another title drop, you guys. I think that
We're
was 3
just on a roll
here. Anyway. It was amazing. It was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
And of course, we couldn't leave you listeners without our obligatory shout out to ourselves. So go follow us on Instagram so you don't miss the teasers that we put out 1 week before the episodes air. And of course, some more fun content.
Yes. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And as always, thank you everyone for tuning in. And we'll hear you. We'll
talk to you.
We'll talk to you in the next one.
Bye.
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 Make It Make Sense is the official podcast of the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies at JGU Mainz, Germany. This podcast is hosted by Marlene Winkler and Paulina Schlosser and edited by Paulina Schlosser. We're recording at the sound studios of the Zentrum für Audiovisuelle Produktion at JGU.
For more information on us, check out our website and don't forget to always keep up with us on Instagram at Obama Institute. Thank you for listening.